The Great Houses hate each other. Theft, murder, assassinations, secret raids, standard stuff. A quote from Hasfat Antibolis. The Great House customs collect from ancient Dunmer clans and tribes, but now operate as bureaucratic parties. In modern times, Morrowind is governed by the Grand Council of 5 great houses: House Redoran, House Telvanni, House Sadris, House Indoril, and House Dres. House Hlaalu formerly convened on the council, but gave up its seat to House Sadris in the early 4th era. Each house ruled a titular precinct on mainland Morrowind: Redoran in the northwest, Hlaalu in the western center, Telvanni in the east, Indoril in the central heartlands, and Dres in the southeast. 3 of the houses also had significance on the island of Vardenfell, and classified themselves by their established colors: red for Redoran, yellow for Hlaalu, and brown for Telvanni. Dunmer Great House membership is predominantly a circumstance of birth and marriage, but imperial settlers may also become adherents of a Great House, or may be taken into a Great House. At first, a foreigner may achieve a position in a house as an oath-bonded laborer, swearing restricted devotion to a single house, and relinquishing initiatives with all other houses. Later, after dependable employment and advancement in lower ranks, an outlander may seek adoption into a great house. Adoption and promotion to higher ranks in a great house demands that a great house delegate stand as benefactor for the contender's nature and adherents. Finding a counselor to back an outlander regularly engages fulfilling a grand duty for the potential advocate and the great house in question. In moments of severe emergency, house counselors may choose to elect a hortator, who holds the capacity to compose choices on account of the house as a whole. Appointment of a hortator obligates solid approval among all counselors. It has been known for a single contradicting counselor to battle a competing hortator contender in an engagement to the death, thus assuring the dignity of the counselor if they triumph or justifying the contestant's talent if they fail. The Great Houses have their provenance in the ancient traditions of the Chimer, a self-banished Aldmeri faction who followed their prognosticator Veloth across Tamriel from the west. They deserted their previous nomadic conduct and segregated themselves into governmental clans, which would develop into the great houses Indoril, Redoran, Telvanni, Hlaalu, Dres, and Dagoth. In the First Era 416, after almost 200 years of defeat by the governing Nords, the Chimeri champion Indoril Nerevar coalesced the quarreling great houses as hortator, also creating affinity with the Dwemer, their common adversaries, and triumphed in throwing the Nords out of the province. Nerevar and the Dwemer chief Dumak Dwarf King afterwards built the first council of Resdayn to collectively govern the territory as a self-sufficient society. Resdayn prospered for a few centuries until the War of the First Council erupted amid the profane Dwemer and the doctrinal Chimer houses Indoril, Redoran, Dres, Hlaalu, and Telvanni. The duty of the sixth house, House Dagoth, is not entirely understood. Some imperial allegations tell that they allied with the Dwemer in the war, while other depositions, counting the apocrypha of the Tribunal Temple, declare that they never double-crossed their kin. Whatever the circumstance, House Dagoth was believed annihilated subsequent their failure at the Battle of Red Mountain. After Nerevar's passing, 3 of his accomplices from House Indoril, Vivek, Almalexia, and Sothasil, prevailed to take domination of the council, which they retitled the Grand Council of Morrowind. House Indoril, because of their affiliation with Nerevar and the Tribunal, persisted to be the commanding party in the Grand Council right through until the closure of the Second Era. During this time, the Grand Council was culpable for sectional administration in Morrowind, while the land as a body was controlled discursively by the Tribunal. In the Second Era 896, the armistice was endorsed between Tiber Septim and Vivek, which saw Morrowind restructured as a territory of the Empire. House Indoril testified that they would withstand this to death, and the Lord High Counselor of the Grand Council, himself in Indoril, denied to approve the treaty, and rejected to retire. He was assassinated and succeeded by Hlaalu. An abundance of other Indoril had taken to suicide. House Hlaalu, who had encouraged reconciliation to the Imperials since the legions began accumulating on the western confines, took this moment to take over many Indoril councils. Their eager loyalty to the Empire sealed the Hlaalu as the governing Great House through the Third Era. Not much is known of the Grand Council through the Third Era, but the part of the nominal head sovereign of Morrowind, individually elected by the Emperor, was first occupied by Queen Baranziah, a representative of Clan Ra-Athim, and thus House Hlaalu. Her son, King Helseth of House Hlaalu, was the Caliph of Morrowind at the closure of the Third Era. His realignment of the Grand Council was perceived by some as a restoration to more accustomed Dunmer ways, although he also achieved to convince both his house and House Dres to support the abrogation of slavery and influence that code throughout the council. During the Oblivion Crisis of the Third Era 433, the Empire removed the legions out of Morrowind and the region was left practically helpless. While House Redoran prevailed in conceiving an infantry and House Telvanni were able to shut some of the Oblivion gates, the Redoran city Ald'ruhn was devastated by the Daedric onslaught, and House Hlaalu was left vulnerable without the support of the Empire. After the eruption of Red Mountain in the Fourth Era 5, which annihilated the colonies on Vvardenfell, Morrowind came under attack from the Argonians of Blackmarsh. Helseth's annulment of slavery had come too late. House Hlaalu, due to their familiar ties with the Imperial authority, became the blame for all of the Dunmer people's anguish. As an outcome, Hlaalu was deprived of its Great House position and disbanded from the Grand Council. House Telvanni, having lost a majority of their colonies on Vvardenfell to the Oblivion Crisis, was almost eradicated in the Argonian assault as well, with at least one record of its annihilation when the last continental colony also came under siege to the Argonians. A few survivors evaded on a ship, the Pride of Telvos, which was later discovered totaled in Skyrim. The last child of the Telvanni ancestral line itself was produced up in Blackmarsh under the Argonian title of Branche, although some of the house endured to rediscover a settlement in Solstheim under the aging Master Neloth. Telvanni, in fact, occurs to have reconstructed well enough to grip its seat on the Dunmer Council, while the previously anonymous House Sadris was elected to fill the void left by Hlaalu. House Redoran grew to become the distinguished power in Morrowind, taking the seat as leaders of the Grand Council. They converted the capital to the Redoran city of Blacklight, where the Grand Council coincides within the Root Spire. By the archaic traditions of Dunmer civilization, a house may dispute the confidence of another house in the person of one of the house's established nobles. The established noble of the assailed house is signed for death, in ancient times officially marked with a black banner, but in current times distributed with a legal printed civic disclosure. If within the year of objection the established noble still lives, the objecting house must openly abandon any further accusation or rumor on the matter. In pre-tribunal Morrowind, altercation was carried out with free warfare. This was outlawed by the tribunal, and only a ranking disputing noble or Morag Tong assassin could assault the marked noble. Before the eruption of Red Mountain, houses consistently employed the Morag Tong, taking out classified contracts called writs. This practice allowed houses to wrangle one another on a small scale without periling public peace and constitution. Codes of conduct under the House Wars are complicated and slight, and the Morag Tong pursued in the ethical and valid prosecution of the sectarian feuds. House Wars are costly, perilous, and disorderly to all houses affected. On the Isle of Vvardenfell alone, a dozen or more marked challenges were being litigated at any one time. House Redoran values the ethics of work, force, and devotion. Work is to one's own esteem, and to one's own family and clan. Force is the crucial earnestness of life. Life is difficult, and events must be brought to justice, bared, and cerebrated upon, with owed responsibility and seriousness. Devotion is honor for the gods, and the merits they speak for. A light, irresponsible life is not worth living. House Redoran manages the Redoran district of northwestern Morrowind from the citadel of Blacklight, close to the confines of Skyrim. In the district of Vvardenfell, the house's council seat was occupied in Ald'ruhn, and all councillors resided there in the pitted shell of a gargantuan prehistoric emperor crab, in the district known as Ald'ruhn under Scar. Other Redoran-governed settlements on Vardenfell included Kuul, Margan, and Aldevelothi. The main focus of House Redoran is cultivating the customs of the established Dunmer, and, more explicitly, the way of the soldier. Due to this focus, the Tribunal Temple was an essential ally. There is also collective appreciation among them and the Fighters Guild and Imperial Legion. They have less appreciation for the other Imperial associations, such as the Mages Guild, the Thieves Guild, and the Imperial Cult Doctrine. The Wizard Lords of House Telvanni have customarily disengaged themselves, following acumen and finesse in isolation. But certain enthusiastic wizard lords, their adherents, and applicants have embarked candidly into the match to command and capitalize on Vardenfell's estate and means, building belfries and infrastructures all along the eastern coast. According to Telvanni standards, the authoritative characterize the ideals of ethic. House Telvanni matches the disposition of my brother Sothasil, iconoclastic, profane, unconventional. A quote from Vivek. House Telvanni ruled the Telvanni district of eastern Morrowind, and conducted the eastern allocation of the Vardenfell district from its council seat in Sadrith Mora. The house constitutes primarily eminently pompous and determined sorcerers, and is understood by many as the house of the Master Wizard. Here, it was natural to excel through the hierarchy by eradicating or otherwise indisposing other members. Of the Telvanni lords, only Master Arion of Telvos appeared to be able to look further from the end of his nose and at the matters of other people. The rest desired little more than to be left in solitude to their experiments and aspirations. The other representatives were correspondingly dogmatic in attitude and did not aim to be ordained over by any other associations, principally the Guild of Mages. The Telvanni generally did not collaborate with other houses or guilds, nor did they have many adversaries except for activists and the Imperial Mages Guild. In the Second Era, they declined to side with the Ebonheart Pact, much to the dismay of the other houses. On the other hand, the Telvanni did not have the typical animosity towards vampires that most other factions had, and some of their lords and mouths were amenable to communicate with them. Wizards did not shun vampires roughly as much as others did. The Indoril are orthodox and traditionalist patrons of the temple and temple jurisdiction. House Indoril is brazenly belligerent to imperial practice and theology, and conserves many long-established Dunmer practices and customs in opposition of imperial law. To my sister brother's city, I give the holy protection of House Indoril, whose powers and thrones know no equal under heaven, wherefrom came the Hortador. A quote from Vivek. House Indoril governed the Indoril district in the mainland of Morrowind from the historic capital city of Almalexia. Indoril district composes of the lands south of the Inner Sea and the eastern coast, including the citadel of Mournhold, positioned within Almalexia and the settlement of Necrom with its city of the dead. House Indoril has no provincial estates on the Isle of Vardenfell. The Indoril have always held distinguished bearings within the temple ranking. Throughout the eras, the outcomes of the House Indoril and the temple have been firmly linked. House Dres is a rural agricultural community, and its large salt rice farmsteads confide entirely on slave industry for their industrial growth. Always sturdy temple followers, House Dres is contentious to imperial rule and practice, and personally antithetical to any endeavors to restrain the establishment of slavery. House Dres represents the past of pre-tribunal Great House culture, a persistent tradition of Daedra and ancestor-worshipping civilized Dunmer clans. A quote from Vivek. House Dres holds occupancy only on the Heartland. It controlled the Dres district of southeastern Morrowind from the city of Tyr. The district consisted of parts of the lush Deshan Plain, an outskirted Indoril district, and the bogs and marshlands of Blackmarsh. In the mid-Second Era, House Dres also dominated the cities of Ebonheart and Kraganmore in central Morrowind. It was properly authorized as a great house by Grandmaster Thauthil Dres after a slave raid over Thorn. The Dres had a chiefly bucolic but still very upscale rustic agricultural population, cultivating ample salt rice ranches on the grasslands and marshes enclosing Tyr. The Dres were also the Dunmer that exported laborers to the other great houses, in custody of thousands of slaves, mostly Argonians, in their egregious slave pens of Tyr and the neighboring farms. House Sadris is another of the 5 great houses of Morrowind, and at the birth of the 4th era, after the Oblivion Crisis of the 3rd era 433, and the eruption of Red Mountain in the 4th era 5, House Hlaalu was dismantled of its great house position and cleared from the Grand Council of Morrowind. House Sadris, whose preceding prestige and properties are unknown, was elected to occupy the 5th seat on the council. As a conclusion of its intimate exchange with the imperial authority, House Hlaalu has surfaced as governmentally and economically prevalent among the great houses of Vvardenfell and Morrowind. Hlaalu gratifies imperial practice and legislation, imperial legions and administration, and imperial power of business and church. Hlaalu still dignifies the old Dunmer ways, the ancestors, the temple, and the noble houses, but has eagerly acclimated to the brisk speed of adjustment and advancement in the imperial provinces. House Hlaalu is one of the 5 traditional great houses of the settled Dunmer. It governed the Hlaalu district of western central Morrowind from its historic capital of Narsis. Midst the 2nd era, House Hlaalu's existence on the island of Vvardenfell was restricted to the port town of Sedanin, but by the late 3rd era the house had a council seat positioned in Balmora, with other Hlaalu-run settlements at Saran, Hlaa-Oad, and Gnar Mok. House Hlaalu could be described as malleable and practical, and any ethics they might have had came second to commerce. Early in the 4th era, soon after the Empire discharged Morrowind, anti-imperial attitude and House Hlaalu's partnership with them among the Dunmer led to the depriving of its status as a great house, and House Hlaalu was cleared from the Grand Council of Morrowind. Their spot on the council was taken by House Sadris. The house was broadly concerned with industry and politics, searching to bolster ties with at times unorthodox allies such as the Empire, and despite the fact that earnings was often an immediate goal, conventional Hlaalu practice observed the profit of great influence over coin. This was their tremendous fortitude. They were fast speakers and astute merchants, and their great debt. Most Hlaalu were able to be bribed, either with coins or other aids, with their managers as no omission. House Hlaalu adherents were also experienced thieves, masters of stealth, lockpicking, blackmailing, and backstabbing, both actually and allegorically. While some delegates were genuine and courteous, others were more underhanded and fraudulent. However, House Hlaalu's most distinctive feature was its enthusiasm to live in conformity with the other races, placing it apart from the other, sometimes sectarian, Dunmer great houses. Pity Dagoth in the 6th house. All they do, all they are is foul and evil, but they began in brightness and honor, and the cause of their fall was their loyal service to you, Lord Nerevar. A quote from Peakstar. House Dagoth, or commonly called the 6th house, is the obsolete 6th great house of the Chimer, led by Vorin Dagoth, later known as Dagoth. All evidence of the house's existence were ravaged after the Battle of Red Mountain, and its representatives were either executed or assimilated into the other houses. Unapprehended to all, Lord Dagoth had remained and spent centuries gradually constructing his fortitude and prestige from within Red Mountain. This climaxed with Dagoth's experiment to recreate the Dwemer god construct Numidium in an endeavor to dethrone the Tribunal and overthrow Morrowind. In the 3rd era 427, Dagoth was killed and his intentions interrupted with the annihilation of the Heart of Lorkhan by the Nerevarine. Not much is known of the clan, attributed to by some as House Dwemer. During the time of the First Council, Resdayn was unified by the Chimer champion Nerevar and the Dwemer king Dumak. According to some imperial documents and tribunal apocrypha, the Dwemer of Resdayn were acknowledged as a great house. House Mora was a lesser house of the Dunmer which no longer exists. Members of the house were supposed to have some human heritage, and they were rumored to have been involved in concealing the Staff of Chaos underneath Mournhold. House Ra'athim was the authoritative family from the city-state of Ebonheart. They were known for being prospectors of Mithril. Some of the most distinguished Ra'athim are Kataraya and Moraylan. House Salathon is a little-known clan that died out at the same time in a grand battle during the time of Chimer. They have an ancestral tomb in the northwestern Gash, neighboring the town of Gnesis. House Sotha was a lesser house with properties in the estate of Ald Sotha, regarded as a mediocre town belonging to a mediocre family. The only known representatives were Sotha Sil, a future member of the tribunal, and his older sister Sotha Nal. It is said that Vivek saved Sotha Sil, the only remaining member of the house, from there when the town was eradicated by Mehrunes Dagon.